Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar entitled Geomatica InSAR Module. Geomatica 2017 represents one of the biggest software releases from PCI Geomatics in several years and provides improved analytical capability through the addition of InSAR processing for DEM extraction and subsidence and uplift measurement and multitemporal analysis. In this webinar, we'll take a deep dive and a close look into the new InSAR processing module available with Geomatica 2017. Which provides an easy-to-use and powerful set of processing tools to work with interferometric synthetic aperture radar imagery to derive deformation maps and extract elevation models. Deep stacks of InSAR pairs can be analyzed to derive cumulative deformation or velocity of deformation changes. Attendees will be able to download the 2017 trial software and work with a RadarSat-2 InSAR pair to derive information and deformation products. Following the presentation and demonstration, we will have some time for questions and answers. So at any time during the webinar, please use the questions panel to ask a question, and we'll select several at the end of the webinar. I'm your host today, David Pickney. I've been working in the geomatics field for more than a decade with a background in geophysics and experience in sales, technical solutions, contract delivery, and product management. My responsibilities include product planning, competitive positioning, and all aspects of launching new packages and updates. Sean Malamed is our presenter today. He is a skilled technical solutions specialist here at PCI Geomatics and an enthusiastic, experienced application developer. In addition to his work directly supporting sales and marketing opportunities, he is instrumental in assessing and communicating application needs, value, and technical details. Sean has been closely involved in the InSAR project and will be our presenter today. I'm honored and pleased to introduce, we also have John Wessels, our senior scientist and principal InSAR developer, who will be joining us for the question and answer period following the presentation and demonstration. A few notes about the webinar today. Note that all lines will be muted during the presentation, but if you have any questions, you can enter those in the questions panel, or you can raise your hand in the interface and we'll be able to attend to any questions you may have if you have any problems hearing or any other technical concerns. The session is being recorded. It will be distributed following the presentation as well later this week. Again, please let us know if you're having any trouble hearing the audio or seeing the screen by sending us a chat message or raising your hand. Now, before we begin the presentation in earnest, I have a poll for you. We've got about 4 of these quick questions that we're going to ask throughout the webinar today. I've opened that now, and we're interested in knowing what InSAR software you're currently using. Now, if you're not using anything, you don't need to answer. And if you're using something that we don't see on this particular list, you can specify in the questions panel if there's a particular package that you're using that you don't see here. We'd be interested in knowing what package that is. And again, if you're not a current InSAR user, you can just skip this question. So we've got about a third of you have submitted your votes already. We'll just give it a few more seconds. Most of the answers coming in. It looks like NV SARscape is the most popular package. ERDAS InSAR also used by about a quarter of you. A few with the remaining packages. And again, if you are using another package that isn't listed, please feel free to just type in the questions panel which package that is. Okay, thank you. We've collected those answers, and we'll continue with the presentation now. For those of you not familiar with PCI Geomatics, we are geospatial software experts who provide commercial and educational desktop packages, developer tools in the Geomatica Developer Edition, and enterprise solutions, including cloud, for image processing and analysis in the GXL, or Geoimaging Accelerator. Geomatica 2017 is the latest version of our desktop suite and was launched in April of this year. We previously presented an overview of the new capabilities, including orthomosaic updates and sensor additions. As part of this 3-part webinar series, we also gave a dedicated presentation on the new Object Analyst add-on module for image segmentation and classification. As noted, we have a wide variety of offerings, and today we'll be looking in depth at what's new in Geomatica 2017 InSAR add-on module. So let's start with a quick overview of the value of InSAR processing. First and foremost, it allows you to measure elevation changes too small for other sensors. In this case, we're talking sub-centimeter changes in elevation that can be measured through interferometric methods. Using this, we can generate accurate DEMs, of course, in all weather conditions. This is an excellent technology for wide-scale deformation mapping as well. Deformation can have serious consequences for all sorts of natural features, drainage patterns, construction stability, and there are a variety of causes. For instance, large-scale effects like glacial rebound, regional activities like mining, oil, or gas extraction, as well as local impacts like dewatering and compacting around construction, excavation, or water wells. The Geomatica InSAR package provides end-to-end processing of the interferometric data with the primary goals of producing deformation maps, digital elevation models, and performing temporal analysis on stacks of images. We'll take a look at a couple of examples of these extractions in this webinar today. So as an example of the primary products, as I mentioned, a digital terrain product, digital surface model and terrain models can be extracted with the cumulative deformation product showing change in elevation between a pair of images, and with a pair or a deep stack of images. It could be dozens of InSAR scenes collected over the same area. We can calculate deformation velocities as well and see how fast elevation is changing, how much rebound or subsidence or uplift there is. In addition to the primary products, there are a number of ancillary InSAR products that we can generate. If we take a look at the first row, you notice I've highlighted calibrated intensity. Not all software packages support this analysis function, but we do. Moving on, coherence layers provide an overview of the quality of your product. Interferograms are very sensitive to baseline and drift, and the topographic phase can account for flat earth or viewing geometry of sensors. On the bottom row, just an example of orbital phase adjustments which account for baseline drift. We've got adjusted digital terrain models, and using stable targets, we can also account for atmospheric phase and random offsets, which accounts for some of the noise in general. So we've got quite a deep level of analysis and products that we can create. I mentioned multi-temporal stacks, and just to illustrate this, multiple interferograms can easily be ordered and spatially aligned using the software. From this, we estimate the total subsidence and the velocity for any pixel. This is based on measuring the spatial and temporal changes in the subsidence pattern and requires strong co-registration using orthos or geometric correction co-registration. These are all aspects of the PCI desktop suite and provide the inputs for this stack analysis. Looking at the image here, you can see an example of the velocity of change over a 6-month period from a stack of images. This is an example of the type of imagery that you can produce. Included in the InSAR package is the temporal analysis tool, which shows cumulative displacement for any pixel at any given cursor position. In the example we see here, we're looking at weekly change in millimeters over 1 month, and we can see that in this collection, a weekly collection, we're measuring changes of 2 to 3 millimeters. So again, very precise and for very large scale as well. So we can cover large areas and get very precise information. Now, in terms of the processing available, thinking back to the workflow we just mentioned, which starts with the interferogram generation and goes through with all the various levels of analysis, we fully support RadarSat-2 and TerraSAR-X for all of these functions. In addition to that, we can generate interferograms for the sensor list that you see on the right-hand side. And we'll have questions coming up later in the poll about your thoughts on that and priorities and development that you would like to see regarding which of those sensors is most important to your work. So before we begin the live portion of the demonstration, just highlight some of the other benefits of our total SAR package. As I mentioned, Geomatica has not only interferometric capability, but also SAR orth rectification and polarimetry. So using this suite, we're able to do all of our work in geographic space with geocoded coordinates as opposed to raster space. We can view amplitude and phase measurements combined, which provides more intuitive understanding of what we're looking at. And in the desktop suite, we have full access to the polarimetric algorithms as well as the radargrammetric algorithms. So a fully capable suite, not only for InSAR, but for polarimetry and general SAR orthorectification and mosaicing as well. So I'm going to pass the presentation over to Mr. Sean Malamed, who's going to show you two different example workflows, deformation mapping and DEM extraction. Sean?
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, David. So my job here today is to present to you some live demonstrations about the different two primary InSAR workflows that we have with this package. So the first one is deformation mapping. This involves creating a stack of displacement maps and then combining them together to map the trend of displacement over time. And then the second workflow will be to generate a digital elevation model from an InSAR pair. Before we go into the actual demonstration, I'm just going to spend a quick moment to go over the workflow. So what you can see and what's important to take away from this slide is that we have our primary workflow up here, which involves chaining together 6 different algorithms, our new InSAR algorithms, all the way from data ingest down to doing the corrections and then forming the phase unwrapping. And then at this point, you have the option to then go in and perform DEM extraction or DEM creation and run these two algorithms, or if you wish, you can then perform the actual stack analysis to generate a temporal analysis and to look at the deformation over time. So the first workflow that I'm going to present is our InSAR deformation mapping. So this is the process of pairing together a number of different InSAR images together and performing the phase unwrapping, generating these displacement maps, and then looking at them, stacking them together over time, and looking at trends such as how areas are either how we're either seeing uplift in an area or we're seeing subsidence in a particular area. So we can use this to map large regions and in order to identify trends over time in these larger areas. So coming back to the workflow that I demonstrated to you earlier, and just to spend a little bit more time on that, this is the particular workflow that we're going to focus on in this specific demonstration. So this, as I already mentioned, involves ingesting our data. Then we're going to perform the co-registration, generate our interferograms, the raw interferograms, perform our topographic correction based on a digital elevation model, which you can get, for example, SRTM DEMs, which I will be using in this demonstration. Then we'll perform orbital adjustments, refinements, finally performing the phase unwrapping, and then going into generating our InSAR stack. So this brings me to the live demonstration. Now, I'd just like to introduce the area that we're going to be working with. So we're going to be working in an oil field just south of Kuwait City, and we're going to be using TerraSAR X data. The reason we chose this area is because you can try it yourself. So after I have finished presenting this demonstration, or after we are done this webinar, you can feel free to go to this URL, which we will provide in our chat window at some point throughout this webinar, and you can download a 30 image stack of this Bergen oil field in order to go through a similar example that I'm about to show. Another benefit of this particular area is it's a well-studied area. So for expert users, this can be a good opportunity for you to test and evaluate our InSAR capabilities, our InSAR algorithms. And then for less experienced users or people that are more interested in learning, this is a great opportunity for you to understand the different causes and effects of uplift and subsidence. Now, one of the important concepts about our InSAR package is the ability to automate and therefore operationalize our InSAR, or this deformation mapping. So when you're working over a large area, it is important that, and if you're working over a large area and you wish to perform a large batch of temporal analysis, it is important to be able to have high levels of automation in order to generate your end products for a more operational use case. Now, these algorithms are, like many of our algorithms, much like our general philosophy. We do expose many of the different parameters for researchers in academia in order to teach and to tinker with the different options. But we also default many of them so that you can chain them together in a much more automated workflow for operational purposes. So I'm just going to leave the presentation now, and I want to introduce to you a Python script that I have created using our InSAR algorithms. And this allows me to basically create a very simple operational workflow in order to perform stack analysis. So let me just quickly walk you through the inputs and the outputs required for running this script. And we will be making this script available on our developer zone within the next week or so. Okay, so I'm just going to go to our input folder. I just want to quickly explain to you what we are going to be doing, or what is required for the script, and just how operational this can be. So at first you can see that we need to point to a raw directory. This is just the root directory that contains all of our raw input images, TerraSAR X images in this case, in order for processing. So it's going to automatically crawl this folder here, find all of the valid TerraSAR X images, and then set them up for processing. We then provide the DEM file. In this case, it's an SRTM30 DEM file, as well as an optional reference image. So you can choose a reference image or not, and if you don't, the system will automatically choose a reference image for you, and I'll discuss that in more detail momentarily. And then we also have our stability points, which is then used for creating a baseline measurement for performing or understanding where we're experiencing subsidence or where we're experiencing uplift. Then we just set up our SAR sensor, so you just choose, in this case we're choosing TerraSAR X, point to an output directory for where all the intermediate or ancillary files will be generated that you can then later inspect to verify everything went through the process correctly. And then finally your output stack files. So that's it. So at this point we're set up, and I can just click run, and it's now going to run through this entire workflow. And whether there's 4 images or whether you have 30, it'll be the same, and it'll be able to run through and perform the stack analysis. So now that it is running, just want to spend a moment to allow you to understand what we are generating. So the initial step is to ingest the raw imagery, and we can ingest it with a calibration type. In this case, we chose Sigma. And one of the first products that's generated is the raw interferogram. So as you can see here, we're actually viewing our value or our data set as both phase and amplitude combined. So we can actually go into the properties here, click display, and we have the option to choose the level of translucency between the phase and the amplitude data. So we can lower our phase and apply it so that we're just looking at amplitude. We can increase it to 100 to look at pure phase, or have it somewhere in the middle to look at a hybrid product. And this allows, as David previously mentioned, for more intuitive understanding of the product that's generated. The workflow then continues on with performing flat earth and terrain phase correction, then orbital adjustments, and these are some of the byproducts that are generated from those workflows or algorithms. And then finally we have the option to generate our displacement maps, and these are the individual displacement maps for the different pairs. So we can have cumulative displacement, so the amount of displacement between different dates, or we can also look at velocity. And then finally what we're generating is our subsidence map, where we can actually take a look at an area go to our tools, analysis, InSAR, open up our temporal chart, and then we can click on different areas in order to evaluate. So as you can see, as we go into the yellow, over this approximately a year, we have almost no subsidence or uplift. And as we go to areas that are more red, you can see that we get more extreme uplift, and then areas that are more green or blue, we get more trends towards subsidence. So this is one of the products that you can generate. Now, David also mentioned about the ability to generate useful products outside of just purely the InSAR workflow. And with that, we have our over 550 different algorithms that are available that allow you to do things such as generate or automatically extract vectors of where you have, for example, uplift greater than 1 centimeter here in red, or subsidence greater than 2 centimeters here in blue. You can then generate buffers for them to identify areas that might be affected around it. And then you could even perform intersect analysis if you have, for example, GIS layers such as roads, pipelines, so on, to see if they intersect any of your critical infrastructure to make sure, or to identify areas that you might be having stress. So this is how you can then use Geomatica to really operationalize your InSAR processes and works. And one of the things that you should also take away from all this is that all of these layers are projected in geographic space as opposed to the raster domain. So there's one other important concept I just want to quickly touch on, and this is the selecting pairs for InSAR stack analysis. So InSAR stack analysis requires that we are comparing a before and an after image, or as we call it, a reference and a dependent image. So we have two primary approaches. One is you can choose a single reference, multiple dependents. This is the easier method to set up because you just point to a single reference. Or the other one is sequential pairing, which in this case is we recommend in most situations. So single reference is basically where you choose a single reference image to act as the reference pair for evaluating or creating the deformation maps. So you would usually choose a image that was acquired in the middle of your time series, and then so you'd use it as a reference for the before and the images acquired after it, usually because that is the closest to all pairs. And as mentioned, it is a much more simple approach to use this, but the downfall is because we have a larger temporal difference between this, we sometimes can lose coherency, which can actually reduce the quality of the results. So I'm just going to bring that up to help you understand a little bit better what that is. This is basically a result of a pairing method. So as you can see, our reference image here, 2010-05-27, is the same for all pairs. Now, if we compare that to our other approach, which is the sequential interferogram pairs, now this is basically where you use one image. So for example, this image is the dependent, this is the reference in the first pair, and then this one becomes the reference, and this one becomes the dependent in the next pair, so on and so forth. So once again, to better illustrate that, we'll just take a look at this log. So you can see in this first pair, 2009-03-13 is the reference, and 2009-04-26 is the dependent. And then in the next pair, 2009-04-26 is the reference. And then the dependent from this pair becomes the reference in the next pair. So this is a more ideal approach that allows you to maximize the coherency that you're going to generate between pairs because you're shortening that temporal difference. And one of the benefits too about creating using Python for this approach is that this is all built into this script. So this script is automatically finds the pairs for you based on their temporal or temporal neighbors. So you can use scripts like this or this one directly once we post it online in order to help really operationalize your process. Okay. So now I'm just going to quickly go and look at the output that we generated as the script is most certainly finished. So we created this folder here. We have all of our intermediate files. So for the researchers or the academics in this webinar, you can take a look and you have access to every single output along the way to generating our stack, so you can really perform your additional research and help educate students as to what is actually happening under the hood. And then finally we have our individual deformation maps for the different pairs, and then the final outputs that are actually important for this analysis. So we get for example, the actual stack itself, which will open up here. We don't need that file. I'm just going to open up one of them as a grayscale. And then we have also our coherence maps. But what's also very important and most useful for a lot of the visual analysis is this stack statistics file. So we can actually bring that in. Once again, we don't actually need the RGB. We're going to look at two layers here. So the average coherence. So we can just look at this as pseudo color. And then we're going to also look at the best fit cumulative displacement. Look at that as pseudo color. And then we can just look at this area. And then once again, we'll just select our bottom layer, the stack layer, go to analysis, InSAR temporal chart. And then you can check different areas. So we can go to an area here where it seems like there's very high uplift. But then if we take a look at for example, our average coherence, we can see that the coherency is quite small. So maybe this is not an area to be trusted. And then you can go to other areas and we can look at our map to find areas of higher coherency. And we can see in this case, you can see we have very little change or deformation in this area. So this is just an example of a small stack that I ran just now. Okay. So in addition to just showing you how the process runs and the ins and outs and how you can operationalize this process, it's also, I believe, important for us to communicate how the accuracy and the verifications that we have done to validate the quality of these algorithms. At PCI, we have a very strong history of generating high-quality algorithms, and with our InSAR package is no difference. So what we did is we performed an accuracy verification with some of our partners, and in doing so, we generated an InSAR deformation stack to measure the deformation of an oil pipeline. And we compared the measurements from our InSAR stack, what we generated with the Geomatica software, to in situ measurements and models for 10 locations along a particular pipeline to see how well our trend fits with the modeled trend. So to take a look at the first site, this is at Cold Lake, Alberta. So we can see that what was generated by PCI or by Geomatica is in blue, compared to the reference or the in situ measurements or model is in gray. And as you can see, we have, after we performed a regression analysis, you can see we have a very high agreement between the two models. And the same is true between the additional 10 sites that we did specific measurements on. As I just sort of go through these and allow you to see these different trend lines or temporal deformation lines. Okay. So that brings me to our next workflow, and we have the InSAR DEM extraction workflow here. So this is, as you probably guessed, the ability to create digital elevation models from your InSAR pair or your phase unwrapped product. So if we go back to the original workflow that I generated, now we're going to go down the route that creates the DEM. So the initial 6 modules or initial 6 functions or algorithms stay the same. In this case, we're not providing a DEM, so that is gone now in this case. So it's going to use flat earth or sorry, an average elevation. And then instead of going into performing the deformation mapping, we then run, we calibrate or run a DEM adjust function, and then finally geocode our DEM in order to create an actual DSM or DTM. Now, similar to the last workflow, this workflow is highly automatable, and this can be done through our different automation environments such as Python or Modeler. So last time I showed you Python, this time I'm going to show you our Modeler environment for this workflow. So I'm just going to bring it up here. Now it takes a few moments to run, so I'm just going to click Run Now and describe the process to you as it goes through. So the first steps is it's ingesting or importing the two TerraSAR X images. So this is a pair. One is the reference, in this case the earlier date, and then the second one is the dependent, so that's the next date that we have captured near it. And then sorry, this is radar sat 2, my mistake. This is not TerraSAR X in this case. So the first process that it actually runs is the co-registration. Now this is in order to achieve an incredibly high sub-pixel accuracy, oftentimes less than 1/10 of a pixel. Then we go on to the next step of generating the raw interferogram. Then we perform a topographic correction, perform orbital adjustments, and then we perform the InSAR unwrapping. And then the output product from this is a relative digital elevation model that we can then perform the final two, run the final two modules, which is to correct or provide the correct elevation values or to adjust the elevation values to be either above mean sea level or above ellipsoidal or ellipsoid, or the other, and then the final option is to geocode the DEM itself. So we'll just let that run through. And then while we wait for that, I'm just going to show you some examples of some of the DEMs that we've already generated. So this is a quite beautiful DEM that we've generated over Baffin Island. As you can see here, we have quite nice, you can see a lot of detail within this area, and using our digital elevation model editing or live DEM editor, you can then perform some additional edits in order to generate or create the product that you would like to deliver. So this is a wonderful workflow and options, particularly for countries that have a significant amount of cloud cover. So in countries where you have, more tropical countries as well as maritime countries, and such as in Latin America, or what you get often in Southeast Asia, this can be a very useful option for how to generate DEMs in areas that are constantly plagued by cloud cover, where optical imagery is much more challenging to use. So this is a wonderful option. In those cases, you likely want to use tandem SAR sensors, but this is definitely a certain option that you can take advantage of. Now, another one that this is actually one that we're going to be generating right now, or we're going to generate a subset of it. So this is over Phoenix. So if we actually can show you again, this is it in pseudo-color hillshade. Now, actually, I like looking at it in this one where we have the pseudo-color elevation values overlaid on the SAR intensity image, and we have it as a translucent layer. So one of the things we can go in, I'm just going to take a look at an area. So you can see there's different areas. You get the different elevation values as you go through. Go through here. So you have quite a bit of information along
Sean,
this.
if you could just point out where on the interface it's displaying the elevation values for those who are following along.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much, Dave. So if you look down here, you can see the elevation values being displayed. Or you can also look over here. So let's just take, for example, this point right here. So you can see it's about 760 meters. And then we actually have our SRTM underlaid underneath. So now that I select our SRTM, click on the same location, you see it's also 760. So ours is 758 to 760. So you get a very high agreement between what we're extracting or what we're generating and compared to a well-trusted source such as SRTM. One of the major differences is, of course, we're generating at a higher resolution. So if we just go back to our model here, you can see that it has completed. And we'll just take a look at the output products. So you can see this is relative DEM. So this is just a subset, and this is just what I just generated right now. This is not geocoded at this point, and it's not adjusted for to be above mean sea level or above ellipsoid, but that there's two additional modules that you run, and I'll just bring up this workflow so you can see them. So it's the DEM adjust function that we have, and then the geocode DEM function that we have. So we will be providing some tutorials on this as well in the near future. All right, so with that, that's essentially the two different workflows that I wanted to present. So now I'm going to pass it back over to David Pickney, and he is going to conduct our next poll question.
Great, thank you very much, Sean. Right, so we've got a couple of questions now that you've taken a look at some of the capabilities here. So the first thing I'd like to know is with regards to development and advancement of this product, what is it that would be most useful in your day-to-day work? Or you could think of it in terms of with the packages you're using now, what seems to be lacking? So I'll let everyone weigh in and vote here, whether you're looking for faster processing, maybe an easier interface, perhaps it's depth of analysis tools. I see for scope, specifically, support for more sensors. And the next question, as soon as we're done with this one, we'll look at specifically which sensors that it is you're looking for, as mentioned earlier in the presentation. So got about half of you have voted so far. We'll just leave this poll open for a couple more seconds, and I'll count it down. Please get your votes in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. So yeah, I'll share this far and away. Additional sensor support is most requested and split fairly evenly among the other questions there. Okay, so let's move on quickly to the next to last poll, and with respect to those sensors. So which sensors are you looking for to be fully supported in the full interferometric workflow as opposed to just the interferogram extraction? And again, if there's another sensor that you had in mind, please feel free to mention it here specifically. We've got a few popular sensors there: Cosmos SkyMed, ComSat 5. Sentinel-1 seems to be taking an early lead. I'll show the results in a moment. We're about halfway through the voting time now. TandemX looks popular. And about 10% of you are voting for another sensor. So again, if you could just answer or type in the questions panel, you can put the name of the sensor it is that you'd like to see the support. And I'm going to close the poll in about 5 seconds. I'll count that down. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great, a couple of last-minute votes just squeezed in there at the end. So bringing that up, looks like we have a fairly clear winner with Sentinel-1, but TandemX also quite desirable. Our goal is to support all of these sensors, but this will have to gauge the priorities and the support level that we can introduce in the upcoming versions of the InSAR package. Great. Okay, so moving along with the presentation, we're into a recap of what we've seen today. So as a reminder of the information we presented at the start, we've introduced a new interferometric SAR package just last month with easy to use, easy to learn InSAR processing. This is both manual or automatic processing, as mentioned as shown in the demonstration itself for phase unwrapping and the other output products. The primary goals here are deformation mapping and DEM extraction, and that includes multi-temporal analysis, so measuring the displacement of pixels in image stacks, and also calculating the rate of change of those pixels to see velocity of uplift or subsidence. And that includes a dedicated visualization and analysis interface to help you to measure the rates of change. As well, we saw that the tool is quite flexible. We have a number of programming interfaces, so whether that is running the algorithms directly within the desktop software, we have a scripting language called Easy. Sean showed you the Python scripting interface, which means we can incorporate third-party libraries and build longer and more complicated applications using that method, as well as the graphical modeler interface, which shows you the processing steps and the progress in a graphical representation. Our goals are expanding the sensor support, and also a note that now that InSAR is moving out of a more research and scientific phase into a fully operational phase, we expect to see a lot more work being done with InSAR imagery and become more in demand as the number of images and sensors grows. We're seeing better orbital accuracy and better signal-to-noise ratio. So we've developed these new tools with that in mind, that we want this to be not only rigorously scientific, but also effective for actual operations and processing. And to that effect, within not only the scripting within Geomatica, but both Python as well. We can provide a lot of automation and development of InSAR applications as well, or you can, using for instance, the Geomatica Developer Edition. Now, with respect to finding out more about the InSAR package, we do have resources available online now. We have a full user guide that goes into very specific details about the interface, the processing, looking at both the theory behind the work we've done, as well as how to actually operate the module. It's lengthy, it's detailed, and it has all the answers that you probably would like to know. We're going to be adding tutorials to this section as well, which gives more overview of just quick start of how to get the system up and running and using a couple of sample data sets. Now, if there are further questions that you don't find there, we of course have our support.pcigeomatics.com website, where we've got all of our tutorials, webinars, developer resources, questions and answers. If you look under the tutorial section, you will see the user manual is online now. That's also on our main webpage, pcigeomatics.com. And we'll be adding the tutorials to this section. You can also search the knowledge base. This will show you results of anything related to InSAR that we have uploaded or will be uploading in the next few weeks, as well as any community discussion. And that brings us to the final poll of the day, after which we will get into the question and answer period. So this is a pretty easy one and not too technical. We're just curious about how, what sort of impact we made on you today, what your impressions were, how interested are you in InSAR from PCI Geomatics. Maybe your existing software is all right, maybe you're not actually even using SAR. But for those of you who are here because you wanted to find out more, we'd like to know if you're interested in being contacted or if you're going to be using the resources available online at pcigeomatics.com and support.pcigeomatics.com. Again, I'll leave this open for a few more seconds. We're about 2/3 of the way through the poll. And if you are using another InSAR package and you didn't see anything here that that particularly swayed you, let us know which package it is that you're using. Again, in the questions panel, you can answer that. Great. I won't show this poll. I will close it in 3, 2, 1. Thank you. I can just say that. Yeah, the majority of people, as expected, are interested. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But we thank you for the feedback, regardless. Now, in addition to the specific InSAR resources that I just mentioned, and Sean has posted the URL for the data set in the chat window, so you can cut and paste that, or just click on it, and that'll take you to the download page. But for the software itself, you can get that at www.getgeomatica.com. That's a fully functional trial version of Geomatica 2017, including this new InSAR package, SAR polarimetric workstation, the SAR ortho suite, and all of the other raster and vector analysis functions that are included in the Geomatica 2017. Another mention that this is the final episode in our three-part Geomatica webinar series for Geomatica 2017. If you go online now, you can already get the recordings for the Geomatica 2017 overview, which includes additional information about all of the advances in Geomatica 2017, ortho, mosaicing, other sensors, etc. And the Geomatica Object Analyst dedicated presentation is also available online, and it's similar to this presentation for image segmentation and feature extraction. We go into a lot of detail in that presentation. All right, thank you for everyone who's still with us. We're going to have time now for some questions and answers. So I'm just going to open up the questions panel and make sure that we have our attendees available and unmuted. So we've got John Wessels, our senior scientist and developer, on the line. I've got him. John, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. And Sean Malamed is still available as well. Okay, so we've got the first question here. I'll put this one to John Wessels. Is the orthorectification needed before proceeding with the other processing?
Well, if you're doing the deformation mapping, you don't need to do it. I mean, the only essential step is that the data sets be co-registered, have a single reference file and multiple dependent files. They'll be automatically co-registered as part of the processing steps. So in that particular case, you don't have to go through the orthorectification process. But we generally suggest that you do that just because it's nice to have, I mean, the deformation map associated with a particular location. And you can modify it to whatever projection you like.
Okay, great. I see another question here. Will SAR polarimetric workstation, SPW, will it be rolled into the InSAR module or still available separately? So this is a question we received from the audience regarding our packaging. So for our commercial packaging, the SAR polarimetric workstation and InSAR module are separate. They're available separately, so you may purchase one or the other. There's no change in pricing or packaging for the polarimetric workstation, and the InSAR module has now been introduced as a new item, as a new add-on module for Geomatica 2017. Now, for education customers, it's a slightly different situation. We have the Geomatica Education Suite, which includes the majority of our processing and add-on modules, including the SAR orthorectification. And last year, we had an add-on package for the SAR polarimetric workstation that has now been renamed to the Radar add-on. It includes both SAR and, both polarimetry and InSAR. So if you are an education customer who is purchasing the Radar add-on for the same price that we were previously offering the polarimetric workstation, we now get the polarimetric workstation and the InSAR capability. It is an add-on to the base package, but it's combined at the same price. Okay, question for John. How do you correct for atmospheric effects and noise?
Well, the way we've done that is we have that the new module. It's called INS CalDefo, which is to calibrate the deformation mapping. And essentially what it is we offer the user a choice of identifying their stable targets, and they can either do that as a vector data set. So if you know the locations of the stable targets, or you can provide the information in image coordinates, whichever the user prefers. And essentially what we do is we take those points and we adjust the phase at those points and interpolate between them to basically remove any residual effects that are due to atmosphere and noise. So basically we go under the premise that the user has their own way of identifying stable targets, and then we calibrate the deformation map accordingly. So there are many methods to do that, and we have all sorts of tools that allow you statistically generate these stable targets. So, there's got to be at least 50 different papers on how to do these in different ways. But for right now, you can do it either by image coordinates or by supplying a vector data set. We accommodate both of them.
Okay. Yeah, similar question along the same line there. Is there a way for the user to select known stable areas to adjust the deformation results, or how would one select those areas?
Well, again, initially our premise is that the user is familiar with the area that they're interested in mapping the deformation for. All interferograms are relative to a calibration point. So an interferogram or a deformation map is relative to some stable target. So you always have to identify at least one location to remove the offset that comes about due to the phase unwrapping. So we don't have a specific tool that generates that. We have contemplated that, and certainly if your users feel strongly about a particular method, we'd be willing to look at that. Right now, it's just a question of there's many different routes available to select stable targets, and we provide the tools that allow you to do many of them, but if people would like to have that streamlined, then we would certainly look at that.
Okay, great. I got some other good questions here from the audience. For InSAR, what considerations are there for choosing images, for instance, path and row, ascending and descending? Is there certain combinations that would work better or worse?
Well, traditionally, clearly you have to have them in the same beam mode, so they have to have the same viewing geometry. My personal preference is for high-resolution data sets, normally in the 35 to 45 degree incidence angle range. So those are the best ones, but clearly a lot of it depends as well on your target and the temporal spacing. So if you have data sets that are very, very far apart, you might get low coherence. If you're looking at a data set that's been modified a lot due to weather, if there's been some sort of earthquake or flooding or something like that where the targets have moved a lot, you might not get very good coherence. So basically what you're looking for is a highly coherent area, and hopefully not too much time between the data acquisitions.
Okay, great. I've got another question here that I see Sean has answered online already, and that is regarding support for RESAT 1 in Geomatica. And I can say yes, we do support RESAT 1 throughout Geomatica. We have specific supported capabilities listed at pcigeomatics.com, and there you'll, if you look under the Geomatica software link or under the resources tab, there is a specific sensor support page and a sensor support document that outlines all the levels of support for all of the sensors that we use in Geomatica, and what type of processing we can do, whether for optical sensors, if it's DEM extraction and orthorectification and pan sharpening, and for radar sensors, things like whether it's suitable for polarimetry, whether it's a compact sensor or not, and if it's included, what level of support is included in the InSAR package. Okay, I think we've got time for at least one more question. Let's see. Let's try this one. How important is the orbit number in InSAR processing? Should the reference and comparative or master and slave images be from the same orbit, or can they come from different orbits?
Well, they clearly have to have the same viewing geometry, otherwise it's not an interferometric pair, right? So, so they have to be from the same orbit for sure.
All right. Great.
So they have to have this.
Sir, go ahead.
So yeah, I was just going to say, they have to both be looking in the same direction and the same look direction, same pass direction, same viewing geometry. And
okay. Good. And here's I think this question perhaps for Sean or John. It touches on something that we discussed during the demonstration as well. I think this is our last question. Looking at the InSAR stack results, we have full coverage. Coherence loss is very common in InSAR. That's what's being proposed. So how do we deal with loss of coherence across these full coverage scenes? I know Sean touched on this in the presentation. I'm wondering if he or you, John, would like to just clarify that on in terms of pair selection.
I can answer that if you like. It's
yeah, sure.
It basically, yeah, you're right. I mean, when we do the phase unwrapping and such, we do give you those results. And one of the things that is produced by the stack is the average coherence. Now we do have tools to mask out and mark as no data areas, those areas of low coherence. So you basically decide on what the threshold is, and you can mark those areas as no data values, and then the unwrapping just won't go there. Right. So it's actually a very flexible tool. I mean, I know a number of people have asked for that sort of capability, and we do support it. It's actually in another module called the PSIQ interp, which basically allows you to calculate the coherence, and then if the threshold's below a certain value, set it to no data. And
okay, great.
It actually works very well.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, John. That concludes our question and answer time allotment. If your question has not been answered, rest assured we will follow up with you via email to ensure that you've got all the answers that you need. And remember, you can download the full version of Geomatica, full trial version of Geomatica, fully functional, at getgeomatica.com. That includes some demo data for InSAR processing. And our presenter, Sean Malamed, has provided a link in the chat window for the additional data that we used in the demonstration itself. So on behalf of myself, that's David Pickney, on behalf of Sean Malamed, our presenter, and on behalf of our special guest, our senior scientist and InSAR lead developer, John Wessels, I'd like to thank all of you for attending our webinar today. You will receive an email with a link to this recorded webinar session to review at your leisure. Again, on behalf of PCI Geomatics, wish you all a very good day. Thank you.